Hello, everyone. This is the 47th episode of the Soccernostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles, and I'm joined by Paul from Shipley in England. For this episode, we continue our interview series with Mr. Gavin Buckland and Mr. Steve Pye as we discuss the English League season by season, with this one being the 1981-82 season. Mr. Buckland is Everton's official statistician, question of sport script consultant, radio Merseyside regular, and Liverpool Echo Royal Blue podcaster. Mr. Pye is a blogger. His blog is That 1980s Sports Blog and a contributor to Guardian Sport Network and the Gooner. On our last discussion for the 1980-81 English League season, we mentioned that it was a time where English clubs had a monopoly on the Champions Cup. Liverpool had just won their third Champions Cup that season, with brown clubs Nottingham Forest winning two of their own. Liverpool were the dominant side of the day, and it was somewhat of a surprise when Aston Villa triumphed during the 1980-81 season with Ron Saunders at the helm and only 14 players throughout the season. Just like last time, in presenting this new season of 1981-82, before discussing the season, we will go through with each team and describe their main transfer activity, along with naming the better-known players in the squad. And just like last time, I won't go through every single player transfer, but just the significant ones with better-known players. Nor will we go through the entire full team rosters, just mention the familiar names so that everyone has a general idea on the teams and players on display. As I go through, please interrupt me at any point if you have any thoughts that come to your mind. In addition, since this is England, there will be transfers during the season. And as we go through our discussion, the significant transfers during the season will also be discussed. Let's start alphabetically, and Arsenal. And let's also mention that this was the very first season that 3 points were awarded for a win. Let's start with Arsenal. Their main transfer signing early in the season was that of striker John Hawley from Sunderland. The side managed by Terry Neal had problems with Willie Young in particular, who was angling to get away from Arsenal, and in fact, he was suspended for indiscipline by the club during the summer. So that was the main talking point at Arsenal regarding transfers. And, well, Willie Young would eventually get his transfer later, but we will get to that. But just to name some of the players in the team, you have the Northern Ireland international goalkeeper Pat Jennings, Scottish goalkeeper George Wood, John Devine, Sammy Nelson, although he would leave shortly, David O'Leary, Kenny Sansom, John Hollins, Paul Davis, Graham Ricks, Brian Talbot, Alan Sunderland. Rafael Mead made his debut this season, and a few years later, he would join Sporting Club Portugal. And Paul Vasson was still on team. We mentioned Willie Young at this point, still on team. Relatively balanced side. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, I think the biggest transfer news with Arsenal that summer was Frank Stapleton leaving Arsenal to go to Manchester United. I think it was 900,000 in the end. The tribunal had to set the fee. And it came a year after Liam Brady left the club, and it was slowly becoming apparent to all Arsenal fans that the sort of successful cup teams, sort of late 70s, early 80s, were starting to dissolve. Stapleton in particular going to Manchester United hurt a lot of fans because it was just before my time. But I do remember when I started going to Arsenal matches, if I spoke to anyone old enough to remember that transfer at the time, they would develop into a big rant about it, saying how much it hurt them. It's a bit, I guess in a way, it's a bit like Robin Van Persie when he left Arsenal to go to Manchester United, except Van Persie did end up winning the title at United. Stapleton didn't at United. So that was really the big news at Arsenal that summer. it was another piece of the jigsaw that sort of kind of disappeared, and it kind of slowly led to sort of Terry Neal's effectiveness being reduced.
Next, we go to defending champions Aston Villa, still managed by Ron Saunders. Their main transfer activity consists of signing the midfielder Andy Blair from Coventry. The side still included Jimmy Rimmer, Nigel Spink, Eamon Deasy, Alan Evans, Colin Gibson, Ken McNaught, Kenny Swain, Gary Williams, Des Bremner, Gordon Cowans, Dennis Mortimer, Tony Morley, Gary Shaw, and Peter Witt. Obviously, we'll get to it, but this season was memorable in Europe. And as far as the league, it was not as memorable as the previous season. It kind of furthered the narrative that we somewhat touched upon last time, that it seemed like it was always going to be a one-off with this squad. What were the expectations around this time, if you guys remember, about Aston Villa?
Well, they played in the Charity Shield, didn't they, against Spurs? I think one of them rare Charity Shields at the time that ever featured at Liverpool, to be honest with you, which is always a rare thing. As you say, I mean, I think when we talk about this time, I think we touched on it last time out, is when you go through the teams and the transfer activity, it's a relatively small number of players, isn't it? There's not many big fees. I mean, I have to remember, like all football clubs, even Man United and Liverpool, were feeling the economic pinch.
Yeah.
So there was not a lot of money circulating within the game. Attendances were down, and consequently, you didn't see much. I think, probably thinking maybe in the early 80s, first half of the 80s, in terms of big money being spent, teams rebuilding, because the money wasn't there. Arsenal, one of the richest clubs in England. What would you get, Steve, collectively for Stapleton and Brady? £2 million, was it, something like that?
Yeah, I think because Brady went to Italy, I think when he was out of contract, I think we might have only got something like £600,000, ridiculous. And then
still big money though, wasn't it? You know, I think when you have a look at this time, the market had collapsed, hadn't it? In the late 70s, you'd seen the big money, £1.5 million for Steve Daly, Andy Gray, Kevin Reeves. You see, dare I say, reasonably, players that can best be described as bang average, going for £1 million fees. And I think by the early 80s, I think the transfer market had collapsed. So consequently, when you're going through all these team rosters, you're not seeing a lot of movement.
No.
And it's something to bear in mind. But I think Villa in 81, 82, if you remember, were out of the league pretty early on. It was all about the European Cup. And obviously they had a few, as you might touch on, had a few problems behind the scenes as well, obviously,
course,
didn't they?
Next, we come to Birmingham City, managed by Jim Smith. They signed 2 Dutch players, Bud Broken and Twan van Mierlo, both from Willem II, Tilburg. The team contained Tony Cotton, Mark Dennis, Republic of Ireland defender David Langan, Colin Todd, Pat Vandenhouw, we mentioned Bud Broken and Van Mierlo, Alan Kirbishley, Archie Gemmell, and Frank Worthington would join later on in September. Then we come to Brighton, managed by Michael Bailey. They offloaded a number of players early in the season. John Gregory went to QPR. Moshe Goriani, the Israeli player, went to Maccabi Netanya. And Brian Horton left for Luton, as well as, most importantly, Mark Lawrenson left for Liverpool. The side still contained Steve Foster, Jacob Cohn, another Israeli player, Gary Andrew Stevens, Jimmy Case. I'm sorry, I should mention that they also signed Jimmy Case from Liverpool and Tony Grealish from Luton. So you could say that Case and Lawrenson were probably swapped in a way.
There was a bit of difference in the cash. Well, I think there was 2 separate deals, weren't they? I think Lawrenson went for 900 and Case went after the start of the season. I think Case. I don't know what Case went for, 300 was or something like that. With adding here, Howard Kendall come to Everton during the summer, and you'll touch on that in a minute, Sean. But he tried to sign Jimmy Case from Liverpool. But at the time, Liverpool invoked the unwritten rule of that the players could move between the two clubs, hence he went to Brighton.
Then you still had at Brighton Mike Robinson, Jerry Ryan, Andy Ritchie, among others. Next, we come to Coventry, now managed by Dave Sexton. They signed Ruud Kaiser from Antwerp and offloaded the likes of Gary Bannister to Sheffield Wednesday. We mentioned Andy Blair to Aston Villa. Belgian player Roger van Gool to Antwerp, and Mick Coop to Derby. Some of the players on display included the Scottish goalkeeper Jim Blyth, Les Seeley, Ian Butterworth, Danny Thomas, Irish midfielder Jerry Daly, Gary Gillespie, Mark Haitley. We mentioned the Dutchman Ruud Kaiser just signed, Steve Witten, and Steve Hunt. Now we come to Everton with Howard Kendall as player manager. They signed Alan Ainscough from Birmingham, Neville Southall from Bury, Mickey Thomas from Man United, and Alan Bailey from Derby. They offloaded Emer Varadi to Newcastle, Seamus McDonough to Bolton, John Gidman to Man United, Gary Mexon to Sheffield Wednesday, and Bob Latchford to Swansea. Surprisingly, a lot of comings and going-ons at Everton. So the team with now Southall in goal had the likes of John Bailey, Brian Burrows, Alan Bailey, Mick Lyons, Kevin Ratcliffe, Alan Ainscough, Steve McMahon, Mickey Thomas, Eamon O'Keefe, Asa Hartford, although he would leave in September, and Graham Sharp. So, Gavin, what do you think about all this?
As I say, it was Howard's first summer in charge. There'd been quite a few managerial moves in the summer, which we may speak about, but Howard brought in the so-called Magnificent Seven that you've spoken about there, and with all due respect, apart from Neville Southall, Jim Arnold come from Blackburn was half decent. They weren't necessarily the standard required. You mentioned Mickey Thomas there, was quite high. It was probably the most high-profile signing that he made, and he ended up offloading Mickey Thomas to Brighton because Thomas had come back from an injury and refused to go to the reserves at Newcastle. So Howard offloaded him in the following week to Brighton, who had also bid for him. Yeah, so it's a rebuilding job there. I think at the time you could argue that some of the players that Howard let go were probably superior than some of the players that he bought. Yeah, we talk about that. Got away with one with Southall, I think, to be fair. I mean, and Neville took a couple of years to establish himself in the team. £150,000 from Bury. But yeah, it was. Amongst Everton fans, there's often talk about that in Magnificent Seven, but not necessarily meaning in a nice way. I think you could probably call them different. I've said before, I don't want to. Howard come from Blackburn, and I think if he had £1.5 million to spend, and I think if Howard had been Blackburn manager, he would have bought exactly the same players. I don't think Howard, when he first joined the club, though he played for Everton, he was still in sort of a Blackburn mindset. But yeah, he got away with it during the season. He had some good players coming through the reserves. You mentioned Sharp there, and Gary Stevens, signed Adrian Heath, Kevin Richardson, who all played for us in the mid-80s, Kevin Ratcliffe, all come through the reserves and became permanent fixtures in Howard's season because his summer signings didn't work out. So he benefited from it in some respects.
Next, we come to Ipswich Town, managed by Bobby Robson. It was a team that many felt were perhaps the better team the previous season, but just ran out of steam at the end. Bobby Robson kept the same squad, no major transfer activity at Ipswich. The team still contained the likes of Paul Cooper, George Burley, Terry Butcher, Mick Mills, Russell Osman, Kevin Beattie, the Dutchman Arnold Muren and Frans Thijssen, John Wark, Alan Brazil, Eric Gates, Paul Mariner, and Kevin O'Callaghan. Still the same side, impressive side. We should mention this would be the last season of Bobby Robson at the helm before being England manager.
So I was just going to say, it's an interesting point on what I'm saying. Ipswich had nearly won 3 trophies the season before. Didn't buy anybody, did they? I mean, I think Steve might remember, certainly, Robson, I think, was sort of on the radar of a lot of clubs. And I think this was always going to be his last season.
Yeah, he'd been linked with Man United before. I think he actually...
Yeah. We haven't come to Man United.
Yeah, I think he turned down Man United, didn't he? But yeah, it was always on the cards. And he was I think he was England B manager.
Yeah.
Definitely involved in the England setup. And he ended up, we'll probably come on and talk about that later. England played Iceland in what was originally a B international, and it was later upgraded to a full international. And he took charge of that team, whilst Ron Greenwood took charge of the team against Finland, I think. So, so it was inevitable, really. He was going to end up as England manager.
Yeah, I think, Man United were after him. I think Sunderland might have been after him as well.
Barcelona.
Yeah,
I heard about Barcelona as well. Like, obviously a decade before he went there, but he was a player.
The irony was, and it sounds absolutely daft, what Ipswich wanted in compensation for him, Barcelona couldn't afford. It's just ludicrous, I mean, I know Everton looked at him. I think Everton wants him ahead of Kendall, as we've always got the option. But 80-81, they'd done the chairman's agreement that you couldn't poach managers during the season. And how at the beginning of May we got rid of Ken Gordon Lee, and because Ipswich were in the UEFA Cup, they couldn't approach Robson, and we were going on tour, so they wanted to make a quick appointment. So they appointed Kendall. But I got the impression that, we talk about it during the season. You're quite right, Sean, that this was not an Ipswich team that was still really good, but I suspect that they peaked probably the year before, and they had a few injuries, and this is like a team of a manager who knows he's going at the end of the season, isn't he?
Yeah, and there were some sort of rumours during the season, like Alan Brazil wanted to leave, and Mick Mills, and I think gradually it started just slightly ebb away, maybe.
I think the 2 Dutchmen were getting itchy feet as well, weren't they? So I think the players knew Robson was going, and Robson knew he was going. So consequently, I think you've got a position where really this is a team on, not totally on the slide, but certainly not past their peak.
I was just going to say, it's definitely their sort of final fling, wasn't it, as a major force? And as you say, a lot of those players were then getting unsettled, and with Robson going, a lot of them followed him. So it's a shame. It's a really great team.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, isn't it, how we spoke about the last time out that they're one of the most fondly remembered English football teams of my lifetime, even though they never won the title. It's funny, teams have won the title, or in our case, a couple of titles, and are not widely remembered, but this Ipswich team is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's a British trait to sort of like teams that sort of get ever so close to winning stuff. And because I remember Dundee United in 1986-87, they could have won 3 trophies and they ended up with nothing. And quite a lot of people remember that team, and the Hearts team of 1986 as well.
Oh yes, losing the title last day. And a lot of people we all seem to remember the teams that just fall short, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, but Ipswich, I think with Ipswich, they did win a couple of trophies, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
So they did win stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it is Bobby, obviously, because it's Bobby Robson, but I think it was the football, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
I think bringing the 2 Dutchmen in, and they had like Gates playing in the hole behind the strikers, and for an English team, they played, I think, more continental style. And I think so it is a combination of, you are saying that sometimes runners up are remembered more than the winners, but I think that definitely comes into it. But I think also it is Bobby. But I think most of all it is the football, and it was. If it had been Man United, it wouldn't have carried the same resonance. But because it was Ipswich, it sort of it sort of remembers a lot more, and they were just that period, 79, 80, they were unlucky. Ipswich remind me a little bit of Pochettino Spurs.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. Yeah,
that being the best team in England over 2 successive seasons.
Yeah,
but not winning the title in either.
The Tottenham didn't win a trophy at all, though, did they? In those seasons.
Yeah. No, but in terms of being the league.
Get that in.
I thought. I expected a response there. I expected a worry. No, but Pochettino
I know what you
came
mean,
second,
yeah.
both South third. I know you beat him. He did come second the first year, didn't he? When Leicester.
They came
But-
third.
Yeah. But best team over 2 seasons, but didn't win the title either. And I think that Robson's team is similar, isn't it? But he should have won the title. He should have won the title. One of them.
Definitely. Yeah.
Next, we come to Leeds United, the season where the once great Leeds side would be relegated and be in the second division for I think 8 years. The side managed by Alan Clark. They had signed Peter Barnes from West Bromwich Albion and Frankie Gray from Nottingham Forest. The side contained the likes of John Lukic, Trevor Cherry, Kenny Burns, Brian Greenhoff. We mentioned Frankie Gray, Byron Stevenson, the Welshman, Brian Flynn, another Welshman, Carl Harris, yet another Welsh international. We mentioned Peter Barnes, Arthur Graham, Eddie Gray, Derek Parlin, 3 Scotsmen, and Alejandro Sabella, the Argentinian who would leave in December. Despite having a number of international players, this Leeds side had been struggling for a few seasons already, and they just went down this season. Perhaps no one could foresee that they would remain in the second division for 8 years, but perhaps it was also not much of a surprise that they did go down.
Well, they were on the decline, weren't they? I mean, they'd replaced, was it Jimmy Adamson manager before Clark, was he? I think he was, wasn't he? They'd got rid of Jimmy Adamson the previous season. And my abiding memory of watching Leeds in the early 80s is how badly defensive they were. They were really dour. And I think, it was no surprise. There's an interesting thing here. There was 8 or 9 massive English clubs in the 60s, the big city clubs. But once you get past 70, a lot of them got relegated over the next decade, didn't they? Man United went down, didn't they, 74. Chelsea went down, 75. Spurs went down, 77. Leeds went down this season. Man City went down the following year. I mean, Arsenal didn't go down, Steve, but in the mid-70s, you nearly did, didn't you, a couple of times? Bottom of the table parts of the season, and it was the only ones left then were Everton and Liverpool, and Everton years later would struggle. But you see, didn't it, over the 70s, that those big city clubs, by and large, who dominated English football in the 60s, all sorts of, I wouldn't say collapse, but they all, because of the wealth in the game was going down, the monetary power they had was less, wasn't it? And I think a lot of them went into decline. I mean, Leeds was probably the worst, I would think, wouldn't it?
They just never replaced that generation of players that they had under Revy, really, as they gradually retired or left. Hunter and Clark himself. I think Eddie Gray was probably the last one, wasn't he? Who's carried on.
Yeah, I think Paul Madeley did for a bit, but I mean, most of them came back to manage Leeds at some point, didn't they? Really?
I think that was one of their problems. They were trying to recapture former glories by appointing the old players for quite a few years. I remember Alan
Clark when he got appointed. I'm a winner, so I've come to win things. But when he gets relegated, they see what he is. No, always a bad thing to say when you start. Start the job. But it was Leeds were, and it was just dreadful to watch Leeds. I think they bought Kenny Burns as well during that season. Dreadful, and they weren't missed, to be honest with you.
Next we come to Liverpool, manager Bob Paisley. Again, Liverpool were the strongest team of the moment. In the summer, they had offloaded Ray Clemens to Tottenham after so many years with the club. We mentioned Jimmy Case went to Brighton. Also, the little used Richard Money went to Derby. On our last podcast, we mentioned the signings of Craig Johnson from Middlesbrough and Bruce Grobler, the Zimbabwe goalkeeper. They were both signed, I guess, maybe late in the season, in line for this coming season. They also got Mark Lawrenson from Brighton. So that was the main transfer activity. In the team, with Bruce Grobler now installed as the first-team goalkeeper, you still have Steve Ogrizovic as a backup goalkeeper, Israeli defender Avi Cohn, Alan Hansen, Alan Kennedy, we mentioned Lawrenson, Phil Neal, Phil Thompson, Ray Kennedy, We mentioned Craig Johnson, Sammy Lee, Terry McDermott, Kevin Sheedy, still in the reserves, Graham Souness, Ronnie Whelan, Kenny Dalglish, David Fairclough, David Johnson, Ian Rush, and Howard Gall. A very good team. You're seeing some young players like Ronnie Whelan and Ian Rush coming more to the fore in this season. They would start the season not that impressively, but then we'll mention obviously how after the new year they would have a revival. But we will get to that. Then we come to Manchester City, managed by John Bond. He signed Martin O'Neill from Norwich just a few days into the season. Well, I would say in September. This would be a major transfer. Trevor Francis would join from Nottingham Forest. The main transfer activity out was Dragoslav Stepanovic, who left the club. The Yugoslav player later became a manager. The side contained Joe Corrigan, Paul Power, Tommy Caton. We mentioned Martin O'Neill, Phil Boyer, Dennis Stewart, Tommy Hutchison, and also the Republic of Ireland midfielder John Sheridan was on the books, but he never actually played for the club.
I didn't know that about John Sheridan. Learn something new every day. We're talking about it's just Bond's second season, isn't he? Come in the year before his first full campaign. The Trevor Francis signing. Now, there's a story about this, which I don't know whether it's true, isn't it? That he obviously went to Sampdoria the following year, didn't he? Now, I've been led to believe that Sampdoria wanted to buy him when he was at Forest, but Clough wouldn't sell him to an Italian club because of the experiences Clough had at Derby County with Juventus in the infamous European Cup semi-final in 1973. Where obviously, I think the feeling was that, and I think the fabled Sunday Times investigation into corruption in European football, alleged corruption in the 60s and 70s, that was one of the ties mentioned. Clough, I think, going off on a tangent, I think was it McFarland and Gemmell were the two players who were suspended for the second leg because the ref booked them in the first leg early on, and Helmut Haller went into the referee's room at half time and shit in, and Clough made it clear after the game that he didn't like Italians. My understanding is, I might be wrong, that he refused to sell Francis to Sampdoria. Man City were used as a sort of drop-off point from then to be sold on to Sampdoria, because he was only there 9 months, wasn't he, Francis? I mean, yes. You don't sign Trevor Francis to you and get rid of him after 9 months.
Interestingly, just a few days before the transfer, Peter Swells had said that we have to stop £1 million transfers. They are going to ruin football.
Yeah. Well, City had been part of the problem, so I mean, I don't know whether that story's true, but it was a bit of a strange deal if you think about it.
So now we come to Manchester United. This season managed for the first time by Ron Atkinson. He signed John Gidman from Everton, and we mentioned Frank Stapleton from Arsenal. In July, I have reports that he approached Cologne for Tony Woodcock, but the club refused. Another major players leaving included Joe Jordan, who went to Italy for AC Milan, and we mentioned Mickey Thomas went to Everton. Again, during the summer and as the season started, he was trying to buy his former players from West Bromwich, Remy Moses and Brian Robson. And he would get them within the first couple of months of the season, which we will get to. But before that, let's go through some of the players. Gary Bailey in goal, Arthur Albiston, Martin Buchan, Mike Duxbury, John Gidman, Gordon McQueen, Kevin Moran, Jimmy Nicol, who would leave in December, Steve Coppell, Ashley Grimes, Lou Macari. We will get to Moses and Robson. You still had Sammy McElroy, who would also leave during the season, Ray Wilkins, Gary Burles, Frank Stapleton. And we should mention that Alan Davies, future Welsh international, would play one match in the season. And of course, Norman Whiteside, who would play 2 matches during the season.
Yeah, worth mentioning. We mentioned Bobby Robson and Man United. I think I'm right in saying that Atkinson was nowhere near the first choice. I think Lottie McMenemy turned it down first of all, didn't he? The Man United job in the summer of '81. I think I might have changed his mind at some point. But yeah, Atkinson was nowhere near the first choice to be United manager. I think he was probably third or fourth on the list. Certainly after McMenemy turned it down, and probably Robson as well.
Now we come to Middlesbrough, managed by Robert Murdoch. The main signing for them was Heine Otto from Twente Enschede in Holland. They offloaded David Armstrong to Southampton, Bozidar Jankovic to French club Metz. We mentioned before Craig Johnson to Liverpool. The side still had the likes of Northern Ireland goalkeeper Jim Platt, Terry Cochran, another Northern Ireland player. Otherwise, it was somewhat of a weak side.
Yeah, they ended up, I think, going down, didn't they? A couple of observations there. There's a lot of Dutch and Belgian players in team squads, isn't it? We've covered so far, which is possibly the influence we're just talking about the Dutch at Ipswich. I think that probably influenced people's recruitment.
Oh, you mean the success
of
right.
Yeah.
And it didn't really work out for anyone else, did it?
No. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I think West Ham bought Van der Elst, didn't he, from Belgium and stuff. It never. And the last was the lad at Notts Forest, wasn't it, which we'll talk about. Never did. The other worth mentioning in Middlesbrough is Jim Platt was an excellent keeper, overshadowed by Pat Jennings, but was a top goalkeeper in his own right.
I think Mark Proctor might have left around this time as well for Forest. So I think that's basically their midfield: Armstrong, Proctor, and Johnston from the previous season. So it's no wonder they struggled.
Yeah, you suspect if he had a sack suit on, that Bobby Murdoch still would have been their best player, wouldn't you? Really, he was that good, Bobby. To be honest with you, tremendous player.
Now we come to Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest. Players leaving included Frankie Gray, we mentioned, who went to Leeds, and Swiss international Raimondo Ponte, who went to French club Bastia. The signings included Justin Fashanu from Norwich and Mark Proctor from Middlesbrough. Players inside included Peter Shilton, Norwegian defender Einar As, Viv Anderson, Mark Proctor, Ken Burns, John McGovern, John Robertson, Trevor Francis, who would leave shortly, Ian Wallace, and Justin Fashano. Some of the chatter around Nottingham Forest this season was about the fact that many felt that Brian Clough was starting to dismantle the Champions Cup winning sides to build a new team. Do you guys remember that?
Around this time, Clough was making quite significant purchases of players, for big money, but they never worked out. I think Peter Taylor always liked a certain type of player. When he hunted for players, he was buying players that weren't Forest players, or even Taylor players, I think. But Wallace was one. He was decent. Fashanu. I think they bought Peter Ward at one stage, didn't he, from Brighton? Did they buy him from Brighton? Was it Peter Ward?
$1 million as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't work out at all. I think it was sort of rebuilding, but the players they bought were nowhere near as good as they'd offloaded Gary Bales, hadn't he? Trevor Francis, Tony Woodcock. Even you'd throw Peter Wiff there into that, wouldn't you? Really up front, and you see it's those four, and who they replaced them with: Ward, Fashanu, and Wallace. Nowhere near as good, and the same in the middle of the park and defensively. They were just it was that classic thing, isn't it? Of which Liverpool managed to avoid. Classic mistake of bringing in players just not as good as the players who've offloaded, and I think thereafter from here. I'm not sure Forest ever really challenged for the title.
No, they qualified for the UEFA Cup in '83, but as far as title challengers,
he won a couple of League Cups, didn't he?
Right, late in the decade,
yeah. They fell victims. They played Anderlecht, didn't he, in '84, which is probably worthy of a podcast in itself, isn't it? That
yes,
tie.
yes.
But yeah, they were very much a cup team, I think. And then in the mid-80s, he started bringing all the young players through, didn't he? They were all decent, a lot of decent players there, but they weren't anywhere as good as the team that he'd had at Derby and the team he'd had at Forest.
Now we come to Notts County, managed by James Sorrell. They signed John Chidozie from Leyton Orient, Finnish player Aki Lahtinen from OPS Oulu, and Northern Ireland player Nigel Worthington from Ballymena United. Other players in the side included Brian Kilcline, Don Masson, Algerian player Rashid Harkouk. But again, team that was always going to struggle in the top division. Now we come to Southampton, managed by Laurie McMenemy. We mentioned their main transfer activity was the signing of David Armstrong from Middlesbrough. The sign contained Ivan Golak, Chris Nicole, Steve Moran, Alan Ball, Dave Watson, who would leave in January, Steve Williams, Mick Shannon, and of course Kevin Keegan. And they would actually have a good season and challenge for a title near towards the tail end of a season. And of course, this was the last season that Kevin Keegan would be in the first division. Next, we come to Stoke City, managed by Richie Barker. The main transfer activity was the offloading of Ian Munro to Sunderland. Otherwise, no major players coming in. The side contained the likes of Irishman Brendan O'Callaghan, Paul Bracewell, Mike Doyle, Lee Chapman, Adrian Heath, among others. And also Dutchman Lok Ursem, but who would also leave later in the season. Then we come to Sunderland, managed by Alan Durbin. They signed Ollie McCoist from St. Johnson, and we mentioned Ian Munro from Stoke. So the side, besides McCoist and Munro, included Sam Allardyce, who would actually leave early in the season, Colin West, Ian Boyer, who would also leave in the new year. Another side that was going to struggle.
Yeah, just worth noticing two Rangers and Sunderland strikers there, and Colin West and McCoist.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Of course, McCoist would become a Rangers legend in time. And Colin West, was he signed by Souness or was it before? I don't know.
Yeah, no, he was signed. It was 86, wasn't it, Colin West?
Right,
Didn't he? Wasn't it? Was Colin West up? Was it turn up at Watford at some point? Or
yes.
Yeah, he played for Watford, Sheffield Wednesday. Yeah, a few teams.
Yeah, he was what you would call a typical first half of the 80s striker. First, decent in the air and a few other attributes. Yeah, I played for a few clubs. I should say there's a couple of players there who went on to McCoy's, Paul Bracewell, Stoke. Yeah, sorry, Stoke went to Sunderland later. But yeah, I think they struggled. They struggled. And Alan Durbin still a manager then? Yeah.
Alan Durbin, yes.
Yeah.
Now we come to Swansea City for the first time ever in the first division. The side managed by player manager John Toshak. The signings included goalkeeper Di Davies of Wrexham, and Bob Latchford of Everton. The one player leaving was Welsh international Leighton Phillips, who went to Charlton. Along Davies, you had Leighton James, John Mahoney, Chris Marustic, another Welsh international, Jeremy Charles, Alan Curtis, and Bob Latchford. For their first season, they did surprisingly well in the first division.
Yeah, they did. I think they'd come up. Had they come up through the divisions? They'd start the Toshak take them over in the fourth, and they'd certainly gone.
I think so. They came up very quickly, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think they're making a film about him, aren't they? I think, and he bought a load of old Liverpool teammates, Tommy Smithy and Callan, mentioned Colin Irwin, people have been at Liverpool. And then Ty Davis had been at Everton. Then he bought Bob Latchford from Everton in the summer. Yeah, there's some decent players there, isn't he? And Leighton James is still decent.
Ray Kennedy later on, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Gary Stanley, who's former Everton player as well. And there was strong Merseyside connections, and Tosh had done a tremendous job over the 3 or 4 years. I think he'd been in charge, and obviously we may talk about his Liverpool links in a bit, but he was they had a good season. They had a really good season, Swansea. I think they won at Ipswich, I remember, and they won the surprise packets of the season.
Their rise and then their fall was just as quick as each other, weren't they? Because they kind of, I think they started Division 4 with Toshak just towards the end of the season, and then they had a really good 81-82 season, but then the wheels fell off spectacularly from that point onwards, and I think it was 1986 they nearly went out of business completely.
Yeah, I heard an interview with Toshak a couple of years ago, and he said that because I think it's tied in with this season. Obviously, is they played at Anfield famously. First game at Anfield after Bill Shankly had died. I think Shankly had died on the Wednesday, I think, or something. And they played at Anfield. Liverpool played at Anfield at Swansea. One of the season's more memorable moments is when they had the minute silence before the game. Toshak took off his Swansea tracksuit, didn't he? And he had a Liverpool shirt on underneath.
He did, yeah.
And I think he intended it as being like a sort of paying his tribute to like being a Liverpool player under Shankly. Brothers looked at it as if like, I want the Liverpool job.
Oh wow!
there was certainly that element to it, and I don't think it went down within the board. Because the reason I say this, I heard an interview with him, and he said that he'd been told that Paisley was supposed to go at the end of '82, and he'd been told that he'd get the job.
Oh wow!
In '82, but then Bob decided to stay on for another year. I think that took the wind out of his sails a little bit, and I think that he said that was one of the reasons why they declined. They may have done so anyway, but he was certainly in the publicly being spoken about as future Liverpool manager, and I think he did say that he was certainly he'd been told he'd be getting a job at the end of the 81-82 campaign, because he'd had a stellar managerial career in 3 or 4 years, hadn't he? Really fitted the bill. Yeah, interesting story that. Swansea.
Now we come to Tottenham, managed by Keith Birkinshaw. So they signed Ray Clements from Liverpool as goalkeeper and Welshman Paul Price from Luton. So in the side, you still had Chris Hughton, Graham Roberts, Ozzy Ardiles, Tony Galvin, Mickey Hazard, Glenn Hoddle, Steve Perriman, Ricardo Villa, Steve Archibald, Garth Crooks, and Mark Falco. Good side would have a good cup run again. I guess until Arsenal with Wenger, they must have been the last team to win 2 FA Cups consecutively, right? I could be wrong about this. I'm trying to remember.
I think you're right. I'm trying to rack my brain. I think you're right.
So when would the Arsenal be? Would that be the 02-03?
03. Should have been 01 as well, but I won't go into that.
Well, I mean, we had a couple of near misses of winning the cup a couple of years on the show. I mean, at Everton. Yeah, I mean, doubtless Steve doesn't want to talk about the strength of the Tottenham team, but
it was a good team.
It was a good team. Yeah, I mean, they were a cup team, but they had a good league running that year.
They did.
They felt it was a ridiculous season, as we'll speak about in terms of postponements and stuff. But I think Birkinshaw gets underrated as a manager.
Oh, and definitely.
I thought he was a really good manager of Spurs, cup manager perhaps, but his teams played really good football. One of the best uncapped. I mean, you mentioned 2 of the best uncapped players.
Hazard.
Hazard was definitely one of them, but earlier on mentioned Paul Davis, just for balance, Steve.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Probably if you're picking an all-time uncapped England 11, they'd probably get in there.
And I think Perriman only got 1 cap, right? something.
I think that was the upgraded one, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Both Hazard and Paul Davis. I mean, Hazard. I was listening to Steve Archibald, who's always really worth it listening to, and he was saying, he said that Hazard could have played for Barcelona.
Okay, yeah.
He was a really, really clever player, overshadowed by Hoddle, wasn't he?
Yeah, definitely.
But he was a superb player, Mickey Hazard. Yeah, really good team, Spurs then. Excellent.
I think they played 66 games, was it, that season? Like you say, I think.
Yeah. If you think about it, there is the League Cup finals, didn't he? The FA Cup, obviously, and they went quite far in Europe.
Semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup, I think.
Yeah. So they played a lot of games. I think that caught up with them.
Yeah, and the postponements didn't help, like you say, as well. But
yeah, because it was worth pointing out. You mentioned about, 81, 82, I think, is the worst winter for since 62, 63.
Yeah,
for postponements, and also as well because crowds have been falling. They pushed it. They kicked off at the end of August, didn't they?
Yeah.
They put the season back 2 weeks. So rather than kick off mid-August, they kicked off at the very last day or thereabouts of August. So because they thought that people on holiday affected attendances, but they scrapped that. They scrapped it when the attendances were worse than the season before. Kicking off on the bank holiday weekend is not necessarily the best way going about things. So it was a really compressed season. And if you have a look at it, it was mad that at one stage Spurs had like 6 games in hand. It was all over the place in terms of the number of games people had played.
It was a World Cup at the end of it. Yes.
Yeah, and a World Cup. Yeah.
They started getting concerned, saying that certain clubs could start sharing grounds with their near neighbours if they couldn't play the fixtures. It was getting that bad, and as Paul said, with the World Cup coming up, it was just so congested.
Yeah, it was also really. I think what I'm saying here is that when Liverpool brag about winning the league after being 12th to Christmas, they had about 7 games in hand on everybody else. That's the put that one in. We have a sustained season fixture-wise, 81, 82. See how many games people played after Christmas. Unbelievable.
So now we come to the last 3 teams. West Bromwich Albion, managed by Ronnie Allen. They offloaded Peter Barnes to Leeds. Otherwise, it was a team that had just lost Ron Atkinson and would shortly lose Remy Moses and Brian Robson. So the players remaining in the team were the likes of Derek Statham, Gary Owen, Cyril Regis, and John Dean, who himself would leave in December. We come to West Ham under John Lyall. I read a report that they tried to sign Paul Sturrock from Dundee United in late July and August, but the club refused. They didn't have many major transfer activity. The site contained the likes of Phil Parks, Frank Lampard Sr., Alvin Martin, Ray Stewart, Paul Allen, Billy Bonds, Trevor Brooking, Alan Devonshire, Paul Goddard, and Stuart Robson. Finally, we come to Wolves, managed by John Barnwell. They had offloaded Emlyn Hughes to Rotherham United and Colin Brazier to Jacksonville T-Men. The side still had George Berry, the Welshman, Scottish striker Andy Gray, and Uruguayan Rafael Villazan. Okay, so we start off the proper season. The Charity Shield was on August 22nd, with Arsenal and Tottenham drawing 2-2 and sharing.
Aston Villa.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did I say?
I wish it was Arsenal, but it wasn't.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry, Aston Villa and Tottenham. Yeah, sharing the Charity Shield for that year. Well, a decade later, they would share the Charity Shield too with Arsenal. So that's
91. Yeah, 91. Yeah.
So this was around the time when Charity Shield did not go to penalty kick shootout, etc. Speaking of Tottenham, before the season, apparently Ricardo Villa had extended his stay in Argentina, and apparently he had problems with Keith Birkinshaw. Didn't have some kind words about English football, saying that is faster, but it's very repetitive and things as such. I guess he had lingering problems with Keith Birkinshaw. We mentioned that Trevor Francis would shortly join Manchester City after the season started. In fact, it was match day 3. That was his first match with Stoke, and he would actually score 2 goals. Incidentally, he scored twice for his last match for Nottingham Forest as well, against Southampton.
Talking about the Francis deal.
That's a brilliant. It's a bit like the Clive Allen going to Arsenal briefly and then being passed on. It's a bit like those rumours, and
yeah. Are we going to talk about the McArthur transfer later on, are we?
Yes, yeah, I've got a note about that as well about McArthur. Yeah. I think a couple of notes I made about the start of the season was that Arsenal chose JVC as their sponsor, their shirt sponsor, and Ipswich chose Pioneer. So they're sort of both Japanese sort of video recorder companies. Right. And QPR's plastic pitch was also launched. I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah. It was that's well where, because you can see, you spoke about the 3 points to the win. You can see now, can't you, how things are changing in football, can't you? Like you're saying about like no money, and clubs now have to get money from other sources, didn't you? And that plastic pitch. I mean, it was just. I know they're better now, but I mean, at the time, people said that was better because, you know, when you see the mud bats of Derby County and stuff, and you see the attraction. But what we know now is what people didn't realise, I think, when they came in, was the advantage it gives you as a home team.
Oh, definitely.
Because the ball, I always felt sorry for goalkeepers. You dive expecting the ball to bounce at a certain level. And I think the first couple of years in plastic pitches, the number of goals where somebody headed it down and the goalie dived at a certain level expecting it to bounce, then the ball shot above his head. And there was QPR were the first, and then was it Oldham? I'm trying to think. Oldham beat it.
Preston, that one as well.
Yeah, Luton. Yeah,
Preston,
Luton, Preston. Yeah. So you can see where football's going now, can't you? That's a good point of which I never thought about. Yeah, because Liverpool had the Tati, didn't he? JVC, Panasonic. Yeah. United then had Sharp at some point, didn't he? Yeah. So you can see now multinational companies and football.
Yeah, it's starting to just drift in. Yeah. Arsenal paid 600,000, I think it was, for JVC, and Ipswich 400,000, I think it was. But and then Ipswich, I think their new stand, I think it might have cost something like 1.5 million, and it was sponsored by Pioneer, but that was partly the beginning of the end because Bobby Robson left, and then they stopped qualifying for Europe, and then they had to start selling their players. And
well, this is one of the other things, isn't it? About where you spoke about Forest, is there was a few clubs, you know, the decliners from the clubs in the 70s who built big stands, thinking the money was going to be there. Chelsea was one of them. Chelsea, Forest, Wolves all built big stands, thinking they'll be paid for by supporters. But actually, nobody turned up. Football was in decline, so they were getting no money, and that was a recurring theme, I think, at the time. Quite a few clubs ended up out of pocket because they built stands for spending a lot of money, but never got the money back through the turnstiles.
Speaking of that, early in that season, Aston Villa decided not to authorize television transmission of their match versus Birmingham City. They were worried about gate receipts if the match was televised. Apparently, there was an agreement between the Football League and television companies authorizing this once per season.
Yeah, I've not heard that. I know the clubs, I mean, Everton did it. I mean, I think there were quite a few clubs in the early 70s. I mean, Brian Clough, strangely enough, Clough, the TV, never off the telly. He didn't like televised football. Which he shows with the famous interview with John Watson, doesn't he? But yeah, I didn't know that. I don't know how that works. So if you were chosen, you were allowed to reject one request a season then? Sean, is that right?
That's what I understand. Yeah.
And I suppose that's a reflection. I suppose Philip picked Birmingham, knowing full well it'd be on the telly.
Yeah. So Derby match, you would assume maybe full house.
No, I didn't know that, but it makes sense.
Ahead of transfers of Moses and Robson, West Bromwich manager Ronnie Allen complained of influence of agents on players. So nothing new there.
No, nothing new there. No.
Yeah.
Worth mentioning there that was West Brom when they going through their period of run as managers, weren't they? Who did they have? Did they have Ronnie Allen, Ron Wiley, Ron Atkinson, Ron Saunders? All as consecutive managers, which is well worth reflecting upon.
Yeah.
So we come to the month of September. By match day 6, which was on September 22nd, West Ham is the leader. By the next week, by September 26th and through October, Ipswich is the leader. We come to some transfers in the month of September. Sammy Nelson left Arsenal to join Brighton. We already mentioned Trevor Francis joining Manchester City from Nottingham Forest, and Remy Moses finally joined Manchester United from West Bromwich Albion, and Sam Allardyce left Sunderland to join Millwall. Also, Charlie George left Southampton and joined a club called Bulova at Hong Kong. You mentioned earlier, Bill Shankly passed away on September 29th from a heart attack. So the month ends with Ipswich as leader, West Ham and Swansea City as challengers.
Quite an open season. I'll let Steve say the Sammy Nelson story.
Well, I'm dropping shorts.
Oh yes, yeah. Famous photograph. Yeah.
I wonder what would happen if that happened nowadays. I don't know, but
it was Eddie scored, and was it to the North Bank?
I think it scored.
Yeah.
And it's definitely in front of everyone's seen the picture, but I haven't read fully about that story, but I have seen the pictures and
there's a famous picture of it, isn't he, where he's moving to them, and I think the other one was like that was in the 70s. Was it Terry Mancini did it to the director's box? Was that a QPR?
Oh,
he did exactly the same, and he ended up in front of the beach. But I don't think Nelson. Was there any action taken against Nelson? I remember the story at the time. There's an absolutely brilliant photograph of him behind the goal, and I thought he might have
been fined, but I'd have to double check that one.
Yeah. Sammy Nelson's other claim to fame, suppose, is the FA Cup draw, isn't it? Where he didn't get the 9 mixed up with the 6.
Did he?
You ever seen? I think he pulled out. He read the ball wrong, didn't he? The wrong team. Got mentioned, but real character, Sammy. Yeah, as you say, I don't know what would happen now. I mean, social media would be all over that, wouldn't it?
Of course,
yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, you mentioned West Ham. It was interesting that they beat Tottenham 4-0 away. David Cross got all 4 goals, which must be still celebrated at West Ham, I guess. And then they beat Southampton 4-2, and Paul Goddard got a hat-trick. So that's some decent players, West Ham, at that time, I tell you. So.
Yeah, well, they come up, hadn't he, that season?
Yeah.
They ran away, hadn't he, with the second division title. And they were obviously a first division team playing. When you see that team, it's just full of first division and really good first division.
A lot of decent players, of course.
Yeah. And I think going back, didn't Goddard score against Iceland? Was that his only cap? Go back to this Iceland game that keeps on getting mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, famous game. But it was a really good West Ham team and doing their normal good start to the season.
Yep.
We come to the month of October. Manchester United pay a record fee of £1.5 million for Brian Robson of West Bromwich Albion. I don't know for how long it would remain the record transfer, but obviously it was much referenced transfer for years to come.
I think was it the Beardsley break? It stood for a few years, didn't it?
Yeah, it was about 6 years because they changed some of the regulations around that time about paying fees up front rather than stretching them over seasons. And as you say, the times were obviously tougher.
Yeah.
It made it much more difficult to afford that sort of initial investment. So I think that was one of the reasons this remained for a long time.
My main memory of the Brian Robson one was, Steve, I'm sure you remember, it's from the worst signing, the worst signing ceremony in the history of football, doesn't it?
There was a table in the middle of the pitch.
It looked like from the local primary school, though, didn't it? It's like they gone to the local primary school, got like a desk and a school chair and sat them down. And it just, even for it just looked, I think he said he found it a little bit embarrassing. You know, I'm not surprised when you see that. It just look, I don't, if you're going to do it properly. But it just look as though he just got a kid's desk from the local school. And the irony of that as well, which you think is that, did he play Wolves and Sammy McIlroy scored? Robson being bought to replace Sammy McIlroy, and Sammy McIlroy scored a hat-trick, didn't he?
Oh, did he?
On the same day, yeah. We won 5-0. I don't remember that because we obviously used to, that would be our game. You know, like he used to have the big match.
Yeah.
Obviously, Granada. That would be essentially. Worth remembering when we talk about this is like BBC had match of the day, but ITV had their own regional football, didn't he? So if you're in the Northwest, obviously be focused on the Manchester, Liverpool clubs, and you've obviously had the big match, Steve. So the big games that probably you remember a lot because you've seen them on the big match, which I never seen.
Oh, yeah.
Because I remember the Man United game because it was the big game in the on the kickoff match up here. And it's just it's one of the great images of the season, isn't it? Really, it's just like £1.5 million player sitting at a school desk in the middle of football pitches. When you think about transfers happen now and stuff, and the big showbiz stuff, it's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
For this month, by match day 10, around October 17. Swansea was on top, and we mentioned Liverpool's struggles. At this point, they were a mid-table team. And something worthy of note, in this match day, Brighton 3, Liverpool 3. Kenny Dalglish scored, and this was his first goal since November 1980 in the league. So we're talking almost a year. Yeah, it just continues how Liverpool were struggling around this time. And kind of continue from the previous season. Also, Manchester City was reported to have refused Arsenal's offer for Tommy Caton.
Yeah, they did get him a few years later, yeah.
And there was also a report on Liverpool losing too much money for not enough attendance. And that was the reason why they had agreed to play in the Toyota Cup match against Flamengo in December. Because if you remember, you have to remember these matches were often ill-tempered around this time. And I think Liverpool, they refused to play in 77 or 78, one of them. I don't remember.
Both? But I think they never played.
Oh, they never played this,
play neither. No. In 81.
But but they needed the money, so they agreed to play. From match day 11 to match day 16, we're talking like October 21st to December 8th, Manchester United would be the league leaders. This month of October would end with Manchester United at the top, Ipswich not too far behind. And in fact, they had a couple of games in hand. Some transfers to mention, we already mentioned Brian Robson, but also Kenny Burns left Nottingham Forest to join Leeds. Asa Hartford left Everton and joined Manchester City. Steve Nicol left Ayr United in Scotland to join Liverpool.
Yeah, that was a big fee that though, wasn't it? It was the 300,000. Steve Nicol, tremendous player. That's a big fee for somebody from Ayr, with all due respect, isn't it? £300,000. And
Norwegian Age Hareid left Molde and joined Manchester City. Martin Jol, speaking of Dutchman that we mentioned, he left Twente and Skede and joined West Bromwich Albion this month. And of course, he would be back decades later as Tottenham manager in the Premier League. We come to the month of November. And another transfer to mention, Liverpool's Israeli defender, Avi Cohn, left Liverpool and joined Maccabi Tel Aviv. At the end of November, Manchester United was still on top with Swansea City just behind them. Manchester United would be on top again going to the December. And at this point, Liverpool is 10th. One thing to mention for this month of December, in Everton's match against Swansea, Howard Kendall played because he was player manager. Yeah. And this was his first match for Everton since 1974 as a player.
Yeah, I spoke before about our signings and some didn't work, and Howard's retained his play registration because he's been player manager at Blackburn. And it was a measure of his problem with being is he was the best player when he left Everton in 1974, and when he come back as player manager in 81, he's still probably the best player. To be fair, I'm not underestimating. I mean, I think it'd be interesting. Player managers now you don't have him anymore, and I think he's really good player manager. He's a few, wasn't it? Dan Hoddle, did Vialli play manager? I know it was later on.
Brian Robson played a couple of matches for Middlesbrough.
Yeah. Kenny Dalglish did. I've also never had a player manager, Steve.
Not in my lifetime. I'm trying to go back through the 70s, and no.
I can't remember at all. But that was Trevor Francis did it, didn't he? At a
yes, Sheffield Wednesday and QPR.
It's one of those things like outfielders going in goal that has sort of disappeared, hasn't it, from the football? But it was always an interesting aspect to it, that really player managers. But yeah, it was how it came back because, let's say, like the signings hadn't worked. So it's interesting. Yeah, I mentioned Martin Yole there as well. He was he used to English football later, didn't he?
Yes. And so this month of December, Swansea go on top mid-December. Some other stories from this month. Towards the end of December, there were rumors that at the time he was 35, 36 years old, George Best was about to sign for Middlesbrough. However, he left and joined San Jose Earthquakes in USA. And the Middlesbrough manager, Bobby Murdoch, was furious and said that Best had not even phoned him to inform him. Best responded that he had never agreed to play for them, so how could he have betrayed them? So that was a story that was in the news. The month ends again with Swansea at the top, followed by Manchester United and Ipswich. Liverpool is 12th at the time. Some player transfers in this month of December. Jimmy Nicole left Manchester United and joined Sunderland on loan. West German player Jürgen Robber, he left Calgary Bloomers and joined Nottingham Forest. We mentioned Willie Young of Arsenal. He was angling a way out of Arsenal early in the season, and he finally joined Nottingham Forest. And John Dean also left West Bromwich Albion and joined Norwich. We should mention a match on the Boxing Day between that. In fact, Steve, you've written about in your blog.
The Liverpool 1, Manchester City 3. Yeah.
Yes. I just want to point out that this is a reference match that would have ramifications for the rest of the season, as the Liverpool revival would start from this point. But talk about the more interesting aspect of this match.
Well, yeah, I wrote about it recently because Manchester City's record at Anfield is pretty abysmal. So I tried to go back to this match, Boxing Day 1981, and yeah, Liverpool were in a bit of a sorry state, really. They had Bruce Grobbelaar making mistakes in goal, left, right and centre, and people were saying he was no replacement for Clements, obviously. Phil Thompson was the club captain at the time. He wasn't playing very well, in his own words. He admits that. And yeah, Man City fully deserved their 3-1 victory. As I said, there's a couple of mistakes by Bruce Grobbelaar amongst that.
Also,
think Man
they had
City
lost to Flamengo 3-0 for the.
Yeah, they'd lost in the World Club Championship as well. And yeah, like you say, they've gone down to 12th. They were 10 points off the top. They might have had 3 games in hand, but Man City were, I think, top at that point. And
Yes.
as I said about Phil Thompson, they basically stripped him of the captaincy and said, concentrate on your game. Graham Souness was made captain. And then I think they had a tricky FA Cup draw away at Swansea and they won 4-0, and then they never really looked back after that. They just seemed to sort of crank through the gears and crush everyone before them, really. But
yeah, thanks for that, Steve. I really appreciated that.
Sorry.
Yeah. Cheers. How long have we got? There's a couple of things worth pointing out there, though. I mean, it was a rebuild. I mean, if you see the Liverpool team in 81 and 81-82, they obviously brought Robillard in, they brought Lawrence in to effectively replace Thompson, I think. Case, Kennedy, and then McDermott left, and so the Craig Johnston, Lee, and Whelan came in to play with Souness, and obviously Rush had sort of replaced. I mean, because Rush had played in 80-81, not scored, and I think he was unhappy. I think he went to see Paisley at one stage, and he's one of them. As soon as he got his first goal, he never stopped. Scoring. So they were in transition, but it was the speed in which it changed quite quickly. And the other thing about it is Souness. There was other things. Souness replacing Thompson ended up having a little bit of a feud, didn't he, for many years?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Which I think was more to do with when Souness was manager. Effectively, I think. Got rid of Thompson when Thompson was reserve team boss. I think it all come back to the captaincy. So it had longer term implications, really.
Yeah.
I always remember that. I don't know if you met. I remember it. Alan Parry was on grandstands because he was commentating for BBC, wasn't he? And I think he said,
was, yeah.
This is is this the end of an era at Anfield? Because it perhaps felt like that.
Yeah, it did look like that at the time because it just Bruce Grobbelaar. I think Alan Parry said there's a sad figure in goal, and he just looked completely out of his depth. And
he did, yeah. Because Thompson had. Sorry, Steve. Sorry.
Yes, yeah. I think we all got to kind of know Grobbelaar from that point onwards. He could make the odd mistake, but he was a decent goalkeeper, but. Like you say, Thompson had to punch one off the line for him.
That was it. Yeah. I knew there was something. I think in the context of the season, this is the standout game of the season, isn't it? It's the pivotal game. Well, you could argue that it's one of the pivotal games of the 80s and for other reasons, but it's definitely the pivotal game in the campaign in terms of how it eventually shaped out.
We mentioned the calendar year ends with Manchester City on top, but they're followed closely by Southampton, Swansea, Manchester United, and Ipswich. So we come to the new year, 1982. Early on, it's Ipswich and Manchester City who go on top. Few stories worth mentioning. Alan Ball Sr., father of Alan Ball, was killed in a car accident in Cyprus on January 2nd. And I remember this made the headlines. Another story, you already mentioned Bob Paisley taking a captaincy from Phil Thompson. Also, Howard Kendall signed Adrian Heath from Stoke. And Howard Kendall said that he is the reincarnation of Alan Ball, my former teammate at Goodison Park. We have made a good deal. About Adrian Heath, of course. So we come to some managerial changes. We have John Barnwell on January 8th, resigning as Wolves manager. Then you have other transfers, such as Jerry Francis leaving QPR and joining Coventry. We mentioned Adrian Heath. Alan Bailey goes in the opposite direction from Everton to Stoke. You have Eamon O'Keefe leaving Everton and joining Wigan. Ray Kennedy leaving Liverpool, joining Swansea City. Ian Boyer leaving Sunderland, joining Nottingham Forest. Dave Watson leaving Southampton and joining Stoke. Mike Doyle leaving Stoke and joining Bolton. And We mentioned before the Belgian player Francois van der Elst. He left New York Cosmos and joined West Ham. So in this month of January, Southampton go on top towards the end of the month. Another story I want to talk to you, it does not concern the first division. But again, Steve, I want you to touch up on it because it's important about the history of English football. Can you talk about the Bristol 8 and its significance to English football?
Yeah, it was Bristol City, and it was the Ashton Gate 8 they were called in the end. Bristol City had spent far too much money on wages and contracts, got long-term contracts, so players were tied into long-term deals. I think they got relegated. Was it 1980? I can't remember actually. 1980, and they were basically. I think they were £850,000 in debt. They owed the inland revenue 110,000, I think it was, and losing £4,000 a week. And they basically said the only way we can get out of this is to declare the club bankrupt and reform. But they had to get 8 of the players to effectively tear up their contracts. So quite a lot of pressure was put on these 8 players to walk away from the club with a bit of a payment, but not as big a payment as they would have got if they'd fulfilled their contract. But the Ashton Gate 8 did this in the end after a lot of pressure was put on them. Quite a lot of them had played a lot of games for Bristol City, so they obviously felt some affection with the club. And I think there's a sort of memorial or statue or something like that at Ashton Gate now to mark what they did for the club, really, because without them, Bristol City might have gone out of business. So.
And again, this is another opportunity to remind everyone to check out your blog because there are a lot of good stories there. And this is one.
Yeah, I fully support that. I think Steve's blogs are fantastic. And
thank you. I'll pay you later. I do say on social media, to be fair, that they are really good. Apart from the ones about Liverpool winning stuff. Sorry, I can't avoid that. But
yeah, no, yeah, the 80s, yeah.
We come to the month of February. There's a number of managerial changes. On February 2nd, Wolves appoint Ian Greaves as their new manager after John Barnwell left. Birmingham City, they sacked Jim Smith on February 15th, and in his place, they appoint Norman Bodell. But the biggest managerial change was that of Ron Saunders, who had led Aston Villa to the title the previous season. He left on February 9th. There was a dispute over his contract, and he'd be replaced by his assistant, Tony Barton. And obviously, everyone knows the story how Tony Barton would actually take this team and win the Champions Cup at the end of the season. I've heard that it's a contract dispute, but I'm not exactly sure was it over the duration of the contract or the payments? I don't know. But
I think it was something to do. It was something to do with Saunders. Always liked to wear to a rolling contract, didn't he?
Yeah. Right.
And they wanted to fix term. I think there was other things going on as well. But they always well fit Ron, wasn't he? He was. He's a hugely underrated manager, isn't he, Ron Saunders? As we said last time out, hugely underrated. But I think it was Ron liked a rolling contract, and he wanted to time down to something that was a little bit more fixed. But I think there was other stuff going on as well. But,
surprisingly, 9 days later, he was appointed as manager of Birmingham City. So,
I think he didn't. I don't think Saunders took charge for this match, but Villa played Birmingham shortly afterwards, and he was at the ground, and there were a few songs sung towards him from the Villa end. I think David. I can't repeat some of them on here. But
yeah. I don't think Ron would not have been bothered by that, would he, really? You know?
No.
For this month, Southampton goes on top, and they're followed by Man United and a reviving Liverpool, who actually defeated Ipswich 4-0 early in the month. The month ends with Southampton at the top. Again, Swansea City is right behind. Transfers to mention for this month of February. Brian Flynn was loaned from Leeds to Burnley, and Sammy McIlroy left Manchester United and joined Stoke. I also came across an article about Martin Jol at West Bromwich Albion. Apparently, he had already received 7 yellow cards and 1 sending off in 16 matches, which had earned him a nickname of a Dirty Dutchman. And he said that, I am a victim of a reputation that I do not deserve. I don't know what's happening to me. Also, worth mentioning that Arsenal signed Yugoslav international Vladimir Petrovic, but for the following season.
Yeah.
Well, what was he like, Steve Petrovic?
Well, he was. I don't want to sound like I'm some youngster, but he was just before my time. But I've read reports that he would have prospered sort of under Arsene Wenger, sort of in the more sort of modern. Well, I say modern era, but yeah, bit more modern era. It probably wasn't the right time for quite a scrawny player to be sort of playing in the in the first division on our sort of, as we said earlier on about the muddy pitches and the hard-nosed midfielders you came up against then. And
he was a technical player, and I guess he was probably perceived to be not physically strong enough to succeed in the English league.
It was a funny season this for Arsenal, because I remember most of the times watching the telly, it was always 0-0. Like Man United and Man City, and I don't think they scored a lot of goals, did they? We lost Stapleton, and I think he only had Alan Sunderland. It was probably the only striker, wasn't he?
The problem is Stapleton went, and then they tried to get John Hawley came in, who was awful, and I think it was Ray Hankin came in for a bit, but he never really played, and they had Raphael Mead and Paul Vasson, youngsters trying to make their way, and Brian McDermott, and they were trying to get boys to do sort of a man's job really, and they had a really terrible start to the season. Picked up towards the end a bit, but
I don't know what you finished, 5th or whatever. Like, but I always remember, like in Verby on Match of the Day or something, it would be 0-0 at Main Road, 0-0 at Old Trafford. So you did reach the semi-finals of the League Cup, didn't you? I think
that was the year after. 82,
was it? Did you not play Liverpool in 82? Have I got in the semi-finals? Have I got that?
No, we lost to Liverpool. I think it was the 4th round after a replay. I think it was.
Oh, was that? I knew they played 2 games. I remember Kennedy got sent off. Yeah,
he did. Yeah.
But you finished well that season, but I can't remember being too excited by it. No, I think you definitely had a reputation for being really, not conceding much.
Yeah,
but not scoring enough.
No, I think it's a sort of classic, sort of almost mid-table sort of team, really. But either way, they did finish quite high.
But Barbie, I'm sorry, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but that Bristol City thing reminded me. That was the Mick Harford thing, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Well, Mick Harford was, along with the Ashton Gate 8, I think the Mick Harford transfer helped Bristol City, but.
Yeah, but there was something to do with, wasn't like they transferred them to Birmingham, but Newcastle owed Bristol City 100,000, so Birmingham gave the money. He went to the way it out, wasn't it? Bristol City transferred them to Newcastle to sell on to Birmingham. Yeah. So the 100,000 that Birmingham going to pay to Bristol City, he paid to Newcastle, so Newcastle paid the 100 grand he owed to. I remember this was a quiz question years ago. It was 3 clubs in one day. It was just purely so Newcastle could pay off the money to Bristol City. It was just all a bit mad.
Yeah, it's mad back then, but
crackers.
But you mentioned also Southampton being top in February, but they did lose 5-1 to Ipswich, and Alan Brazil scored all 5 goals. So I thought I'd mention that, but.
That didn't happen very often, did it?
It didn't. No. It's quite mad to think of a team top of the table and losing 5-1, but I suppose it does happen.
We come to the month of March. We mentioned that Jim Smith had been sacked previous month. Just a couple of weeks later, on March 1st, he was appointed as manager of Oxford United. Southampton still at the top in this month of March. There's a story about the Welsh Federation being mad at Tottenham and Birmingham for playing a match on a date and refusing to release the players. The league match was on March 23rd, and Wales had an international match on March 24th. So at the time, there was an international calendar, and with fixture congestion and everything, these things were bound to happen. And going back to the story that you talked about, that you wrote on your blog about Liverpool and Manchester City on the Boxing Day, we come back to this incident. During this match, I believe Joe Corrigan was hit by a bottle from the stands. So there was an investigation. Within this month of March, the results were released. Apparently, witnesses said that this particular bottle had been behind in the net for a few minutes before being reported to the authorities. And Joe Corrigan himself said that he himself had placed it there. So did the investigation reveal that Corrigan had been wrong and had misled the authorities, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this because I remember when I researched this piece, there was a story about him being hit by a bottle, and I couldn't for the life of me find out what happened. Did Liverpool get fined? Probably because, like you say, it was in March. I probably didn't think it would take till March to investigate. But yeah, it'd be an interesting one to research, maybe. But I'm sure we would have heard about it if Corrigan had faked anything. But
yeah. Was it the Rapid Vienna goalkeeper did that?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that when they played Celtic? Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of done Corrigan too much harm because he later became Liverpool's goalkeeping coach, didn't he? So he never. Maybe that was his reward for keeping quiet in 1981. Steve, that was his
possibly,
This month of March, getting back to Arsenal, there are some newspaper reports that Arsenal were to sign Maradona. Obviously, it's a rumor. I think he had already agreed to join Barcelona anyway a year before and all that. But there are some newspaper reports.
Yeah, strangely, he chose Barcelona over Arsenal. I can't understand why. But he was definitely linked because I heard loads about that story before. But I was researching the season and discovered that. But yeah, that would have been quite interesting if it'd been at Arsenal after the 1986 World Cup. But
that's a natural forward lineup, isn't it? Maradona and Raphael Mead. That's like it is. But going back to it, I remember watching. We talked about George Best going to Middlesbrough. That Man United played at Arsenal earlier that season, about the September, because Best had got him back into the Northern Ireland squad, hadn't he? Got himself really, really fit in America, and there was talk about him going back to Man United. The start of the 81-82 season. I think Atkinson may have been that Atkinson's going to sign George Best, isn't he? And I remember there was talk because he sat in the stands at Highbury. There was talk, I remember, of that United may want to may be interested in getting him again because he got himself, I'd say, probably as fit as what he'd been since he'd left. Well, before he'd left United, even probably the fittest he'd been for 10 years. He's still 35.
It's a shame, really, isn't it? Because you say he's 35 because Northern Ireland qualified for the World Cup, and imagine he could have, because everyone says he's one of the greatest players not to play in the World Cup and World Cup finals, and that would have.
I think that's what I was talking. I mean, I've never had, but Bingham recalled them to the Ireland squad, but George, I'd say that Middlesbrough thing didn't help.
No,
and it was just a little. In that first half of this season, George was sort of maybe coming back to the first division. What a story that would have been.
There this month as well, Swansea go on top briefly, but Southampton by the end of the month and end of March are again back at the top. But Liverpool is really closing in at this point. In fact, in this month, on March 13th, they win the League Cup by defeating Tottenham 3-1 with new stars Ronnie Whelan scoring twice and Ian Rush scoring. And Tottenham's goal was by Steve Archibald. This is the second consecutive League Cup. We mentioned last time that they would win 4 in a row, League Cups. Some transfers for this month of March. You already mentioned Mick Hartford from Bristol City to Birmingham. Byron Stevenson from Leeds to Birmingham. Archie Gemmell, he left Birmingham to join Jacksonville T-Men. Davy Thomas, he left Vancouver Whitecaps to join Middlesbrough. Steve Hunt left Coventry to join New York Cosmos. Frank Worthington left Birmingham to join Leeds. And Mark Wright left Oxford to join Southampton. Although I'm not sure, was this for this season or the following season, the Mark Wright transfer? But anyway, the deal was made in March. Also, Luc Ursem, the Dutchman, he left Stoke to join Sunderland. And Romeo Zondervan, another Dutchman, he left Twente and Skede to join West Bromwich Albion. We come to the pivotal month of April. This is when Liverpool go on top. And I think early in the month, they defeat Manchester United at Old Trafford to go on top.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was a crucial win because United were near the top. I think it was Craig Johnson scored the goal and Bruce Grobbelaar saved the penalty from Frank Stapleton. Grobbelaar, knowing which way to dive, because he later claimed that he'd been reading a match day programme on the toilet before the game. He'd had a picture of Stapleton's previous penalty. So he said that's the it says if you get a penalty tonight, that's the way I'm going to dive again, and he didn't. He saved it. So that was a crucial win. That midweek game at Old Trafford.
Also, Tottenham in this month, they reached the FA Cup finals. They defeat Leicester City. The victory is somewhat tarnished with Leicester fans booing Ozzy Ardiles because I think this is when the Falklands War started. Was it in April? Was it
start of April, wasn't it?
Right.
In fact, I think it might have been the 1st of April.
Right.
Yeah. I think that the semi-finals was about 10 days later. It was at Villa Park.
So I think Ardiles played in the semi-final and then he flew home, didn't he? I think after that.
Yeah, I think he did. I think Villa stayed, didn't he? Villa stayed.
Yeah, I think Villa stayed.
Ardiles was needed for the World Cup, I think. So
right.
Yeah.
He went, but yeah, this was a running story during the month, wasn't it? Well, it was obviously the only news story in town during the month. Obviously, the Falklands War and the impact on what it had on Ardiles and Villa because of obviously they were the two highest profile overseas players maybe.
In fact, Ardiles would be loaned to Paris Saint-Germain early for the next season, then return. Also worth mentioning that David Fairclough, Liverpool's eternal number 12, he left the team to join Toronto Blizzard in April. By the end of this month, Liverpool is on top. We mentioned that the loss on Boxing Day to Man City was the reference point where they turned their season around, and they actually won 20 out of their next 25. In fact, in March and April, they won 11 in a row.
The other big win was they won 3-2 at Southampton. A game memorable for one of the great goals, wasn't it, by Southampton? Only ever seen it with all the team. It's a series of one-touch passes from the left back, isn't it? It goes down the left flank and back into midfield and ended up with about 2 or 3 1-2s in the air. I don't know who scored the goal. Was it Shannon? Was it Steve? Was it? I can't remember. But
yeah, I'm thinking it was Shannon. But I can picture the goal in my head, but I can't picture the score. Sadly, but.
Yeah. I always tend to remember like fluky Liverpool wins at the end of the season, you know. But but not that I'm cynical or whatever, you know, but paranoid. But now, if you watch that, I mean, if anybody listening not seen it, I think it is the Mick Shannon scored the goal, but it's an absolutely brilliant goal. If Barcelona scored under Pep, you'd be still talking about it now, but it was a brilliant goal. But Liverpool had a great run.
Yeah, it's like you say, they won 11 in a row. It's funny because I think Middlesbrough went 22 matches without winning, which is obviously a massive reason why they went down. But yeah, Liverpool from that Boxing Day defeat onwards were just relentless, really.
Yeah.
I think they lost to Brighton maybe and Swansea, but
Brighton at home, I think, 1-0.
Yeah.
I went that game. I went that game and Ian Rush beat the goalkeeper and the real team that ball stopped on the line. Like the ball went over the line. Like, yeah. It was a very rare, one of those things you very rarely see. It was going in. Everybody went to cheer. Well, apart from me, of course. And the ball stopped on the line. Brilliant.
We come to the busy month of May. Early in the month, you must remember the Southampton and the Coventry match that ended 5-5. Any memories of that?
Yeah, I think it was a midweek game, wasn't it? Yeah, I think. Yeah, I remember being at Goodison. We played Leeds. I think it was like about the 4th of May, something like that. And I remember like when the score came over the go. Very few 5-0s. It was the QPR one, wasn't it? The famous QPR Newcastle one. Remember a few years later, was that where Newcastle winning 4-0 at half time? And obviously the West Brom,
pitch.
plastic pitch, and obviously the famous West Brom Man United won in Ferguson's last game. And I think, to be honest with you, they're the only 5-0 games I can remember.
There was one involving Villa, was there recently? I can't remember. It might have been when they were in the Championship. I can't remember, but
yeah. Those are the only 3 I can think of at the top of my head in the top flight. Obviously, the QPR, but I think that was a midweek game. That because I remember hearing the results at Goodison, and everybody was like, "What?" And
I don't think there's any footage. I think it's one of those games at the time. Just as we've mentioned before, there's very few games were actually televised. Those 10 goals have disappeared, unless you were there.
On May 15th, Liverpool clinched the title after they defeated Tottenham 3-1. On the same day, Ipswich lost at home 3-1 to Nottingham Forest.
Sean, they were still going for the title, weren't they, on the final Saturday of the season? This is really important. This is another thing. Ipswich played Borough and Liverpool played Spurs at Anfield, and I think at half time, like Spurs were winning. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember Glenn Hoddle's goal at Anfield?
Yeah.
Oh, absolute 35-40 yards half volley, wasn't it? Flew into the net.
Yeah.
And I think chance that Ipswich could overtake Liverpool, but then Liverpool fought back. And then, if I recall correctly, I think Peter Davenport scored a hat-trick for Forest.
Yeah, they were only 1 point behind at this point. Ipswich had also clawed their way to the top.
Yeah, and Ipswich, like they did the previous season, didn't you beat them right near the end, Steve?
I think Arsenal, Norwich. I think they lost 5 out of the last 7. I think in the end.
Yeah, it's a similar thing to the Arsenal defeat. And then the other thing about the famous thing about that is, God bless his soul, Ray Clements' the welcome for Ray Clements off the Kop.
Yeah, that was
in
good.
The second half. When he's just that famous shot of him running towards the Kop, isn't it? Taking from Anfield Road, and there's just like a sea of hands, and applause for him. It was just a really memorable image of the season. Yeah. He then goes and concedes 3 goals, but It was very close. It was very close, even on that half time and that.
So Liverpool won the title with 87 points. Ipswich were behind 83 points. Manchester United with 78 points third. And Tottenham and Arsenal both finished with 71 points. Tottenham won the FA Cup. They won it on a replay. On May 22nd, they tied Queen's Park Rangers 1-1. Glenn Hoddle scoring in the 110th minute and Terry Fenwick tying the match in the 115th. A few days later, on May 27th, Tottenham won 1-0 with Glenn Hoddle scoring on a penalty kick in the 6th minute. So for the second year running, Tottenham won the FA Cup. So Tottenham finished the season satisfactorily, as did Swansea, who incidentally, Swansea qualified for the Cup Winners' Cup by virtue of winning the Welsh Cup. In fact, could have actually played in the UEFA Cup because they finished 6th. But because they were pushed up in the Cup Winners' Cup, this freed up a space for Southampton, who had finished 7th, to qualify for the UEFA Cup. Kevin Keegan would end up as league's top goal scorer with 26 goals. And the teams relegated were Leeds United, Wolves, and Middlesbrough. We have to mention Aston Villa winning the Champions Cup on May 26th by defeating Bayern Munich. And there's a whole story with Jimmy Rimmer getting injured early on, being replaced by Nigel Spink, who had barely had any first-team action, and so on and so forth. We know the story. This was their zenith as a club, Aston Villa. The following season, they would win the UEFA Super Cup against Barcelona. After that, they kind of slipped down and would eventually be relegated in 87.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out the thing with Villa was they had that, I don't think scare's the right word, is they obviously beat Anderlecht on aggregates in the semi-final, but there was balance, wasn't there, in Belgium, and at one stage it looked as though Villa be thrown out the competition, didn't it?
I remember seeing a programme, and a Villa spokesman was saying at the time that, because a fan ran onto the pitch, didn't he, to escape some of the violence?
Yeah.
And apparently the ref blew the whistle just as an Anderlecht player was about to shoot, and I think it came down to the fact that the ref had blown his whistle. Getting kicked out. Yeah, so it was touch and go at one point, and I think Villa had to play their next home European match behind closed doors in the end, and they were fined 14,500, I think. But it was close for them to be.
It was. There was talk that they'd be thrown out, which would have been interesting, because the spectre of hooliganism as ever was around in this season. But that was my abiding memory. That not by one of them, but the game in Rotterdam was. I mean, Peter Witt tried his best to miss that, didn't he?
It's shame, I mean,
yeah. Manages to hit the inside of the post from 3 yards out when you're standing in the middle of the goal. It takes some doing, doesn't it, really, you know? But
we should definitely mention Tony Morley in that European Cup run. He was fantastic. And how he didn't make the World Cup squad. Obviously I wasn't following football at the time, but I can't really understand that. But how he didn't make
No, I mean, he scored against Anderlecht, hadn't he, Morley?
Yeah, and against Berlin.
Yeah. Was it the following year against Kiev he ran from his own penalty area to score? I think that was the following year, wasn't it? But,
no, he ran from his own area against Berlin and
was it? Yeah. I can't remember which game it was.
Yeah. And I think he stuck his fingers up at Ron Saunders when he scored, because he had an argument with him.
They had a touchy relationship, didn't they? You know? Yeah. There's that famous story. So Tony Morley about his house burning down and going into training. And Ron Saunders wouldn't give, say, house was burnt up, and Ron Saunders wouldn't give him any time off. He's still training and stuff. But he laid the goal on. It was about the only ball he had all game, wasn't it?
Yeah, Because Nigel Spink was the hero, wasn't he, really, at that time?
Yeah. It shows you the depth of British goalkeeping at the time, or English goalkeeping. Yeah. You have Jimmy Rimmer, who, as one international caps himself, comes off, and Nigel Spink comes on. And he played well, and then played for Villa for the best part of a decade, I would imagine. Yeah. And also that the quiz question, who won 2 European Cup winners' medals, haven't played 14 minutes in the finals. Jimmy Rimmer, wasn't he? Because he was on the sub bench for Man U, wasn't he? Yeah. But Villa had their name on the trophy, really, I think, in that game. And they deserved it. And Tony Barton, of course, was forgotten about. People still probably think that Ron Saunders won it now.
Yeah.
Also worth mentioning, the promoted teams that seasons were Luton Town, Graham Taylor's Watford, and Norwich City. Other awards, end of season awards. You have the Footballer of the Year. Steve Perriman of Tottenham won that. The PFA Player of the Year was Kevin Keegan, Southampton. The PFA Young Player of the Year was Steve Moran of Southampton.
We talk about best uncapped players. Moran would be in there, Steve, wouldn't he, I think?
Oh, definitely. I think, Moran, you always kind of start with Steve Bruce at the back, then you Tony Goten maybe in goal, and like Davis, Hazard, and
Howard
Jimmy
Kendall,
Case.
obviously.
Jimmy Case.
About probably you'd argue that the best of them about will be Jimmy Green off, wouldn't you? Oh, Jimmy Green never got an England cap, just beggars belief, you know. But the other thing of that season, I just reminded me, the other memorable image of that season, talking about Kevin Keegan, is the best disallowed goal in history. Kevin Keegan's for Southampton at the Dell against Man United, you know, the overhead kick from outside the box. And I don't know if you've seen that.
Was someone offside in that?
And somebody was offside, you're not interfering with play.
It's ridiculous.
And it's like Wayne Rooney's goal against Man City, you know, the famous one 10 years ago, but like from about like sort of 10 yards further back. And got disallowed because somebody was standing 40 yards away offside. And that was another abiding memory of the season. Best disallowed goal ever.
Yeah. Well, my abiding memory of Keegan that season was obviously the World Cup. I don't know if we're going to come on to the World Cup, but his miss against Spain. Wasn't it?
Right. Him and Brooking going on with 27 minutes left for their only action in World Cup action, I guess, of their careers, basically.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Steve is spot on there about like why he didn't say Tony Morley, because Tony Morley should have come on in that game. He would have give us something different. Yeah, you know, and I think Ron Greenwood was just too conservative, really, in his selection, and you got to pick Morley.
He took took Graham Ricks of it, and
Graham Ricks, yeah.
Even as an Arsenal supporter, I can't see that.
He was starting games as well. He was starting games instead of Hoddle, I think. Which was,
I was going to say that, Steve, but I didn't want to upset you. But
no, I could say it.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing about that, I mean, that World, well, don't talk about that Keegan at that World Cup, is that remarkable story about him driving to Germany.
Yeah.
Was he in Madrid? Was he in Bilbao? And he borrowed the waitress's car, didn't he? He borrowed as a Fiat.
Yeah.
Just to give a background, he obviously had a bad back. He'd had a back injury which had kept him out, and his back surgeon was in Germany from the time that he'd played in Germany, wasn't it? So.
Yeah.
To keep it under the radar rather than fly out, he actually borrowed somebody. It was a girl. I'm sure it was the maid. It's literally the maid or a cleaner or something.
I think you might be right. Yeah.
Yeah, he borrowed a Fiat Uno or something, didn't he? And drove to Germany, innit? To get surgery, which is just unbelievable. You know, unbelievable.
And also some players of the season per club. Now, we should bear in mind that some clubs didn't have this award at the time, so I couldn't find information on it. But for those that I could find, for Arsenal, it was John Hollands. For Aston Villa, I have no info. For Birmingham, it was David Langan. For Brighton, it was Andy Ritchie. For Coventry, it was Danny Thomas. For Everton, I could not find information. For Ipswich, it was Alan Brazil. For Leeds, it was Eddie Gray. And I guess Liverpool did not have that award at the time. For Manchester City, it was Tommy Caton. I could not find it for Manchester United. Middlesbrough did not have that award at the time. For Nottingham Forest, it was Peter Shilton. No information on Notts County. For Southampton, it was Kevin Keegan. For Stoke, it was Peter Fox. For Sunderland, it was Nick Pickering. I could not find info on Swansea, Tottenham, or West Bromwich Albion. For West Ham, it was Alvin Martin. And for Wolves, it was Paul Bradshaw. Did every club have that award at the time? Because some of them, like, I could not find any information.
Some clubs had like supporters club awards. I know Everton did. I think Graham Sharp would have won it in 81, 82. So I think supporters clubs, but most clubs I can't. I mean, Everton didn't have one. Liverpool didn't have one. It was before the pre-Premier League days.
We didn't really touch up on this as much, but do you think the 3 points for a win had an impact for this season in terms of the quality of the entertainment value?
I don't know, Gavin. Would you say, because obviously a lot of teams, I remember I think Stoke got a point at Arsenal one year, and their manager said if you want entertainment, go and see clowns or something like that. And
yeah, that was Alan Turban, that wasn't it?
Yeah.
If you want entertainment, go to the circus.
Yeah. And, I was just wondering, did teams still try and sort of pick up a point away from home and then maybe obviously try and win the home games? Or
it's an interesting one, isn't it? Was it more important to stop the other team getting 3 points in some respects? I think probably came into it. I don't recall it being sort of people saying at the time, "Oh, football's far better. It's 3 points for a win." I think it's somebody, I can't remember. It might have even been Turban himself who said, who moaned after a draw, saying it's wrong that teams have lost. We've had the great game today, and we both lost 2 points because we've drawn. So I think it was more that aspect to it. I don't recall it being people saying, "Oh yeah, football's better." I think probably because it was a more competitive league. I mean, I know it was funny because it was different. It was a different, strange season because of bad weather and stuff. That teams had games in hands. It was a bit like last year. So we had. I mean, how many teams led the first division? Chance, must have been mentioned about 6 teams there, haven't you?
Right.
So I think because it was more competitive, I don't think it made a difference. I think the 3 points has only come into it. Like in the modern petrol-driven world of football, where you've got to win every game to win the title. I think it's only become an issue. Then I don't recall it being an issue in the early 80s. Haven't made much difference because I think I'd argue that once you got ahead, you then went defensive because you didn't want to lose 2 points.
I don't think it had much impact on goals per game or anything like that. I don't think it changed the style of football. Maybe the only thing it did allow if you went on a long winning run like Liverpool's, and I think Norwich in the second division also put together a really good run. You could maybe catch up a bit quicker than you would with the 2 points, but I don't think it had a massive effect on the style of the game or anything like that, or teams being more attacking necessarily.
No. Interesting,
Is one of the main takeaways also that it was back to business as usual with Liverpool at the top? They may have sorted out their problems from the previous seasons.
Yeah, it was from Boxing Day onwards. Obviously, they swept most clubs away, and then obviously the next 2 years they also won the league, didn't they, Gavin? And
yes, thanks, Steve. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Obviously, you can talk about the.
We will get to 85 in no time. Don't worry, Gavin.
There was almost a little bit of hope on Boxing Day that Liverpool with a new goalkeeper and with trying to break in Whelan and Johnston and Rush, and was it potentially the end? But it turned out to be the opposite of that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there was an interesting point, I think, in the February-March, which was the momentum. They just thought they were going to win a bit like City this season, all 4 trophies. And they got beat. We talk about Grobbelaar, they got beaten Sofia, where Grobbelaar let the cross go over his head and he scores. And then they famously got beat at Chelsea when Chelsea were in the second division, 2-0. Just the 2 trophies. But this was This was a different Liverpool than what had been, I think, from the end of it. I would argue, though, not as good. The 78-79 Liverpool team, that was the best team we had.
Yeah.
I think this team over the next 3-4 years was dependent on just like Souness, Rush. It was. I'm not sure about the depth, the amount of talent that had in the 70s, late 70s, was more and more dependent on Souness.
Yeah.
I think this team, but they were beginning. Next 3 years, they won the title in all 3 years, but I don't think they were as good as what they were in 78-79.
We didn't really discuss Ipswich that much, but again, they had a very good season by their standards. Like you said, potentially could have won the title on that last day. But it was the last hurrah for a lot of that squad.
Yeah. I mean, they lost stupid home games. I think they got beat by Notts County at home, didn't they? I think. Yeah, they were not the same. I forgot about the Alan Brazil 5, by the way. Forgot about that. But they never. Don't think they were as convincing as they've been the previous couple of years. And then obviously Bobby went. Had it been announced during the season that he was going at the end of the season, going to England? Or did that come out in the summer? I can't remember.
I think it came out in the summer, if
yeah.
I remember from my research. But because like I said, he took the England B team as it was to Iceland, but then that got a grade in. Then, so I always thought that could be a quiz question because he kind of everyone probably says his first game was it West Germany at Wembley, but technically it was against Iceland, wasn't it?
But Denmark, right?
Yeah, that's mad. That I mean, in fact, we could have had a whole podcast on the Iceland game, haven't we? Because we spent most of the 2 hours talking about it, haven't we? Really, yeah. But no, yeah, it was very much on. I think they just lacked application in the big games. Ipswich for me, the really big matches lacked application. They didn't have this. If they'd had a Soccernostalgia type figure, they would have won. You could said that about half the teams in the division at the time. But they just needed somebody like that. But, going back to say before, there was a brilliant team.
They probably needed a slightly bigger squad as well, didn't they? Because I think Robson always said 1 to 11 we could compete, but then they just got injuries. And
they had a lot of injuries this season, I think. I was just looking at it before. Even John Jackson came back in goal. Remember John? Yeah. But it was Liverpool, but it was a close run thing, I think.
Paul, I think you would have been following this season closely, I'm assuming from beginning to end. What was your takeaway as the season was going forward?
Yeah, I went to a few games this season, got taken to a few games at Leeds, which, as Gavin's mentioned, wasn't the most entertaining time. And also Nottingham Forest. I had a good friend who was a Forest fan, and his dad used to take us both to games. And obviously they were a little bit on the decline as well. Yeah, players like Brian Robson made a big impact straight away at Manchester United, Hoddle at Tottenham. The FA Cup was always still, because there was so little televised football, that was still a defining moment of the season. And this season's was, there were 2 pretty poor games, the FA Cup finals, especially compared to having had a previously very exciting one, 81, Tottenham winning it. European Cup, again, one of the few televised games. And I think Gavin's touched on this, people getting behind the English representative in Europe. In that was a big thing, Villa winning it. Kevin Keegan had a great season, top scorer in the first division. And a player who was always one of my favourites, Cyril Regis, had a really good season. I think was very unlucky not to get in the World Cup squad as well. And that West Brom team, I mean, they got to the semi-finals, maybe both cups, but didn't, they were in decline again in the league. And I think the season was just, as we've mentioned, just a bit chaotic. And both Brooking and Keegan being injured going into the World Cup as well for the national team was a big thing, big talking point. But yeah, as a season I followed really, really closely. And, it was just a story, as Gavin will tired of hearing, of Liverpool coming back and, showing they were the strongest team. I think this was 5 in 7, wasn't it? With Forest and Villa were the other 2 that had won the league. And they were just the dominant team at that time. And like Gavin said, Ipswich just, they were a good team, but just not quite convincing when it came to it. Swansea, of course, was a great story all season as well.
Yeah, there's another point, I think, which you're talking about the promoted teams. It's like you're seeing the sort of change. We're talking about the industrial clubs all going down or struggling on the back of the economic decline, and they were replaced in the 80s by smaller clubs from the affluent south. You mentioned that in terms of the promoted clubs. So we've lost Wolves and Leeds. I'd say we've lost like Chelsea, Wolves, Leeds, Middlesbrough. I think we're relegated. Clubs from the industrial heartland of England, which is obviously struggling economically, and they're replaced by Watford, Luton and Norwich from the affluent south, and then they were followed then by Wimbledon, Oxford, Charlton in the mid-80s. And so you can see how the football is, talking about the football reflecting the change in times and the economy. We've got like video companies sponsoring football clubs, and you can see how like that north about south divide and the general decline of the northern economy is sort of being reflected in the teams in the top flight. And this was just the start of it, I think. That probably lasted till the Premier League started.
Did every team have shirt sponsors by now?
I don't think every team did.
But it's
yeah.
becoming more
Majority.
prevalent.
Yeah, the majority definitely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the problem was you weren't allowed to advertise on telly, were you?
Because I think the 1984 FA Cup final, was that the first one to have shirts?
Yeah. I think the TV company said you couldn't have them on sponsor, even though like other sports are allowed to be sponsored to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Football you had a problem with, and I think it was the '83 TV deal. I think they said football didn't want live telly on the telly. Telly didn't want a sponsored shirts on the telly, so they reached a compromise. The compromise was, okay, you can have live football on the telly, but we want our sponsored shirts on the telly. And I think that was the deal they did in '83, wasn't it? So it was just, you can see in these years how the game's changing, can't you, to what it is now in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Spurs were floating on the stock exchange and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, because there was a Super League was mentioned in the mid 80s as well, wasn't it? And,
most years, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Most years. I mean, all this stuff over the last 12 months or so is not new, is it?
No, it's not. No.
I mean, perennially, it was mentioned with involving Celtic and Rangers, dare I say, wasn't it? And all this type of stuff. And you had you can see where the game was changing. I think it was 83 where the home team kept all the receipts from.
Yeah, that was a big turning point, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was another turning point in the game. Because used to subsidise the away teams. So the away clubs used to get money off the bigger teams. Then that ended from 83, didn't it? So you can see that was a really good point. I've not thought about the sponsorship. Who was sponsoring clubs? You can see how it's changing now to where we are now. Really, and 40 years ago, but it's none of this now is new. It was all there 40 years ago. It was just an embryonic form, wasn't it?
Yeah. So is it worth mentioning, Paul was talking about Nottingham Forest. I think Peter Taylor left at the end of this season, and that slowly sort of started a bit of a row between Clough and Taylor, because I think Taylor ended up at Derby, didn't he, and then signed John Robertson.
Oh, right. Oh, so this was the beginning of the, because
like you said, Clough did sort of build other teams at Forest. They weren't obviously as successful, but he really should have got to the 84 UEFA Cup final, but cheated out of that. And then his team towards the sort of the end of the 80s and early 90s, they won 2 League Cups, didn't they? And they played Liverpool in a couple of semi-finals, obviously. It was a shame. It was a shame the way the sort of Taylor and Clough thing ended. But,
I said that before in terms of his transfers. Taylor was the transfer guru, wasn't he? Bought the players. It was just this time it was just going a little bit for Forest, but it was end of an era, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Football's greatest partnership ends.
Yeah.
Until he turns up at Derby.
Well, next time we'll pick up the 82-83 season. Once again, we'd like to thank Mr. Buckland and Mr. Pye for their participation in this series. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. You may contact me on my blog or on Facebook under Soccer Nostalgia. On Twitter, I'm at SP1873. Mr. Paul Whittle can be contacted on his blog, The 1888 Letter, and on Twitter, he's at 1888 Letter. You may also follow the podcast on Spotify under Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. Mr. Buckland can be contacted on Twitter at Gavin Buckland 1. And Mr. Pye can be contacted on Twitter at 1980s Sports Blog, and his blog is that 1980s sportsblog.blogspot.com. Again, all this information is listed on the Spotify and the blog posting. So once again, thank you very much, and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks both.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. Cheers, Steve. Nice to see you both as well. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.